once you get into the pattern of like, I need breakfast or I need to give my kids some breakfast or shove them a breakfast sandwich as they're running out to the bus or whatever, like it's not that hard to get into the groove of it. And it does make you way less cranky by lunch and less mean to people or less anxious in traffic, which is my situation. But it really does work.
This is Fat Science, a podcast dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
I'm Dr. Emily Cooper. I've been treating patients with metabolic issues for over 25 years. I'm on a mission to raise awareness about metabolic dysfunction and why diets don't work.
Hi, I'm Andrea Taylor. I've been fat, very fat, chubby, morbidly obese, and done almost every diet ever invented. They all worked until they didn't. I've known Dr. Cooper forever, but when I became her patient and we learned metabolism was the real problem, wow, everything changed, and I've never been healthier.
And I'm Mark Wright. It's time for Fat Science.
Wait, does this podcast make me look fat?
Welcome to Fat Science. I'm Mark Wright, along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. It's great to see you.
Great to see you guys. Hi.
All right, on the show today, what should I eat and when? This is going to be fun to talk about this. I think there's so much information out there floating around that's misinformation. There's fasting apps and all kinds of advice, and really, it's confusing, I think, Dr. Cooper, to try to figure out what the best way to eat is. So let's give us just sort of set the table for us, so to speak, if you would, about what we should think about when it comes to the timing of what we eat.
Well, first of all, no two people are the same. So people may feel fine eating a certain way and others will feel terrible eating that way. So it's just good to keep in mind that we do want people to be focused on how their body feels and listening to the cues their body gives them. But in general, food timing is really meant to be on a regular basis throughout the day, regular intervals. And so I always look at the metabolic hormones and how they balance. And if you go more than 3 hours between eating sessions throughout the day, then you'll start seeing hormones like ghrelin, which is that hunger hormone from the stomach that can be disruptive to your metabolism. You'll see that ghrelin going up. And you'll see leptin, which is a beneficial hormone from your body fat. You'll see that going down. And so I always try to recommend eating in a way that prevents those metabolic hormones from getting off balance. So that would be throughout the day, every few hours, alternating meals and snacks.
I know a lot of people, they feel like, oh, I'm so busy in the morning. They often will put off breakfast and, have a cup of coffee, and before they know it, it's lunch, and oh boy, and the timing is so hard sometimes to balance with work. What's the danger, Dr. Cooper, of not eating on a regular schedule?
Well, again, if you go too long, you start throwing your metabolic hormones off. And then once those are thrown off, your appetite will be ramped up, cranked up quite a bit as the day goes on, and your metabolic rate simultaneously will be slowing down. So it'll take more and more food to feel satisfied later in the day. And you may experience things like sugar cravings, especially because we need carbs throughout the day. So if we're not getting them during the day, we start to look for the most readily available, quick burning, fast acting carbs, which could be like sweets and sugars.
There's that saying, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I don't know if that's a marketing slogan or if it's actually true. What's the best thing to eat in the morning, Dr. Cooper, and when?
But there's so many different research, studies going on fighting each other, whether breakfast is really as important as we say, or it doesn't matter at all. And you can find research on both sides of that. But the reality is, if you've gone through an overnight fast, that's a long time without eating. You've depleted basically all your energy stores that are in your liver for use while you're fasting. So you need to like regenerate your system. So starting out with a breakfast that's kind of more substantial, I recommend, so that you get a really good start on the day and you wake up your metabolic system to get it to really perk up. So that would be a complete meal. So that's starchy carbs, a fat, some type of fat source, and protein. And then obviously we want to include fruits and veggies everywhere we can. And I don't really include those so much as like a carbohydrate source because they don't have a lot of caloric value, but they're really beneficial in terms of the micronutrients they contain.
I think you have to think about it logically. I mean, you think, okay, I was sleeping for how many hours, depending on how long you sleep. But even if you sleep for only 6 hours or 7 hours, that's 7 hours you didn't eat. And then how long are you going to go till lunch? I mean, just think about it logically. You got to eat something. So even if you're not having sitting down to like a classic big, big huge brunch, you need at least a little something like uh, an egg sandwich or some oatmeal with fruit on it or just something. And it's once you get into the pattern of like, I need breakfast or I need to give my kids some breakfast or shove them a breakfast sandwich as they're running out to the bus or whatever, like it's not that hard to get into the groove of it. And it does make you way less cranky by lunch and less mean to people or less anxious in traffic, which is my situation. But it really does work. Breakfast is a good thing. Let's just say that. Breakfast is good.
We can all agree with that.
So, Andrea, you've been a patient of Dr. Cooper for about the same period of time that I have, 10 years or so. When you get up in the morning, what's your eating regimen? What do you do? What's your go-to in the morning?
I am not a like, a lot of people, I have the same breakfast every day. I have a different breakfast every day. And I have either oatmeal or I have some other kind of cereal or I make an egg of many different types, like an omelet or a scrambled egg, or I have a quesadilla, or sometimes I have leftover dinner from the night before. I mean, pizza is a fine breakfast.
It
Um,
covers most of the
it
main food
covers all
groups.
your
Yeah.
bases. I don't discriminate against meal categories. I think when you live by yourself, you can do that without having somebody look you over the shoulder and go, "That's what you're having for breakfast." Um, I also there's a protein drink that I like that I put in coffee. So I feel like I'm having a latte from Starbucks. I can call my name out wrong and feel like, "Oh, look, I saved $5." And, that also helps with getting extra protein during the day because you can, carry it around like in a cup like this or whatever. And I tend to drink iced coffee, so it's a little easier to do that. And, yeah, I will have something different every day.
Hmm.
Oh, cottage cheese on toast, which I know is not a popular item, but I tend to like it. Grilled cheese is good
Mhm.
with some vegetables maybe in it. I tend to like. It's not as popular, but people like it when they come over.
I think
I
the
think that's
Yeah.
thing is
good.
to keep it simple, like something that you actually
Yeah,
can eat, not to
right.
overthink it.
And they're
Yeah.
all really fast to make. I
Yeah.
mean, they really all take about 5 minutes to make.
Dr. Cooper, when we've talked in previous episodes that we need to have regular meals throughout the day and proteins, fats and starchy carbs. How much protein should we have throughout the day? Because there's a lot of different advice where some people say, "Oh, you need lots,"
Yeah.
but is there a general sort of formula that we can go by?
Yeah, and again, it varies based on what your goals are, what your athletic picture looks like. If you're, unless you're a strength athlete where you're really lifting a lot of heavy weights and doing like heavy duty exercise, you really don't need a huge amount of protein. You need a good protein source probably like 4 times a day. That would be great for most every single person. And if you're doing something, very athletic that requires, as I say, high strength, you still don't need that much, like maybe 5 servings of high quality protein a day.
Mhm.
So, because we don't protein's not really a preferred fuel for our body to burn as energy, available energy. It's really more for rebuilding muscle, tendon, ligament, structural tissue. And so we don't really store it. We just need it during the day to help with body repair. So if you're doing heavy duty weight training, you're breaking down your muscles doing that, and you have to rebuild them. So you need more protein to accommodate that.
Should we be measuring, like in grams, how much protein we're eating, or is that getting too complicated?
That is a great question because I'm not a fan of measuring stuff. I'm not a fan of portion control and grams and calories and really any of that, because I feel like if we keep it as simple as possible, that takes your brain out of the picture and helps you kind of just tune into your body's needs more. So if you just think of a serving of a high quality protein, so that would be if it's meats or poultry or fish, or if it's cheese, just a basic serving size, yogurt, beans, legumes, nuts, those are all protein sources. So if you just think of, well, if you're really unsure of serving sizes, you could probably trust the package label for a protein food on what a serving size is for the most part. But meat proteins, poultry and fish, it's like 3 to 4 ounces as a serving. But people don't weigh their food. It's just like have a piece, have a piece of salmon, have a chicken breast, um,
It's like what fits in your palm
yeah,
is
that's,
usually for like
although who knows,
a piece
everyone
of.
has a different size hand.
I guess so. I
But
guess for
maybe
me,
maybe a smaller
yeah,
palm person needs a smaller
yeah,
serving. So
right.
I mean, look at the
Like,
size of this palm. I could be gorging myself.
I guess,
I
yeah.
think the thing is
Mm.
just to not overthink it, and think you're making a mistake. Just fill up your plate and make sure it's got all those components. Pile in some veggies and fruit, colorful.
But not like this, Philip. Like,
Well,
yeah.
wherever you can, fit in your salads and your veggies and that kind of thing. But you just need to have also substantial starch, a protein, and where's your fat coming from? Think about that
Hmm.
too.
You know what I've learned over the past, oh gosh, we're 7 episodes in now on the podcast. But what I've really found interesting, Dr. Cooper, is that the brain, as part of the feedback loop of the metabolism, it's not just a machine, our bodies, but the brain and its psychological state and what it's thinking about and worrying about and agonizing over. That's been so fascinating, and it's really opened my eyes to the idea that your mental state has such a big part in this whole metabolic health picture. Explain, if you would, that even stressing about where am I going to eat, when am I going to eat, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Why is that the case?
Well,
It
our brain,
seems really, yeah.
yeah, I mean, well, our brain's it's like a little laboratory, or a very sophisticated laboratory. So it's not only detecting the chemicals in the environment that would represent nutrients or hormones in our system, but also it's looking at our thoughts and our emotional feelings about our food. And too often, people are obsessing over every detail of their food. And you could easily inadvertently send a signal to your brain that makes it worry that you're in some kind of a food shortage situation, like a famine. And if that happens, there goes your metabolic hormones, and it can actually lead to abnormal weight gain and abnormal appetite regulation
Hmm.
Just from stressing.
just from stressing. And it's not only your body that reacts this way. They've done studies that show household members uh, will also react
Oh my God.
if there's the diet mentality within the family and body image dissatisfaction within the family in a family member. Other family members can be affected as well, especially children. And even if
Wow.
their diet hasn't changed, but especially children, and it's even been seen in infants, that infants and children will gain more weight, actually. And regardless of, not really that they're eating more, but their metabolic system will be slowing down more in response to like parental weight obsession or food comments, weight comments, body image comments. So it's so good to just change the picture, around us emotionally around food, not for only for ourselves, but our children and family members.
And it makes sense. We evolved in groups, and I'm guessing that served the group when there were periods of famine and uncertainty that everybody's bodies started to conserve
Yeah.
and really save those calories.
It might be, maybe it's through pheromones, that are kind of things that we can't perceive on a conscious level, but chemical signals.
Wow,
Wow.
that is interesting. Andrea, as you've dieted over the years, the mental state, take me to that mental state. And when you were worrying about how much you were, eating and maybe cutting that piece of bread into three pieces to try to make it go farther. I mean, I guess you sort of lived that, and that
Yeah.
whole scarcity mentality must have played into it, right?
I can't remember when I mean, I can remember when I stopped thinking that way, but I think I grew up with that. I grew up with always thinking, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat this. If I eat this, I better not eat that. I mean, I can't imagine not thinking that way. And even now that I kind of don't think that way, it still creeps in there all the time. I mean, it still comes in like, well, if I have, this, then I just won't eat that. But I know that in my head now, my rational head, I'm like, I don't have to listen to that anymore. And it's actually very freeing and satisfying that it's like, "Ugh, that's just like old talk and I don't have to listen to it." But, it took a really, really long time to banish that talk. And it's really funny because, I mean, obviously, I still have tons of friends who are still in the old system of thinking, and I can't convert the world. But sometimes I'll just tell people, just chill, just relax. You don't have to beat yourself up about that. Eat what you feel comfortable with. Just stop it. Stop beating yourself up. Do you feel okay? Do you feel fine right now? Stop. You don't have to eat any more or any less. You're fine. You're fine.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh, I do feel okay. I'm all right. And it's really weird when people are like okay about stopping to eat what's on their plate. It's really hard sometimes for me. It's like to leave food on my plate is really interesting too. To not do the clean plate club is really weird. Um, like it's just a very different mentality. And sometimes I think eating foods that are like whole foods and not buying a diet food, like that took a long time to realize, oh my God, if you eat whole milk, I mean, because my whole life it was like, well, you got to have that skim milk. And I was like, but it tastes like water. It's disgusting.
The
Um,
blue
but
milk.
it's like, right. But it was gross. It was like, I don't want water on my cereal. It's gross. Um, so, but when I learned, oh, you could have whole milk on your cereal, you have less and it tastes better and you feel more satisfied faster. Oh, makes sense. Like all the things that I've sort of learned going through, working with Dr. Cooper, it's sort of like it's all rational. It all makes sense. Um, and it actually is very freeing. So it's been really good.
Yeah. And the eating cadence, Dr. Cooper, I feel like I'm really starting to get into a nice groove with that in terms of just intentionally having that snack after, 3 hours after breakfast or whatever.
Mhm.
And I feel like I feel better and I feel more mentally awake and my body feels like it has more energy. So instead of just like waiting to run out of gas, I just plan it and schedule it and eat. And it's really liberating when you get into that schedule because it feels good and
Mhm.
it feels so good. And it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it when your metabolism is
Yeah.
whacked
And then
out.
you're starting to probably get hungry at regular intervals too, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I feel like we need to talk about fasting and intermittent
Mhm.
fasting. there are so many people out there who are just on this bandwagon. They're selling apps now where you can sign up for the app that will tell you based on your body when, how much time you should space between meals. If you could break that down, Dr. Cooper, just what fasting does for the body and why is this thing still so persistent, this intermittent fasting fad?
Well, fasting, fasting is something that you can get away with in the short term and maybe in lab experiments, for the short term. But in the long term, especially if you don't have genetics for like normal weight regulation, say you have the genetics for abnormal weight gain, it can actually trigger a lot of weight gain in real life. And these strategies, just like any diet strategies, nearly always backfire. So that's something to keep in mind. And it's funny because the fasting started way back when, as I think we talked about before, but in the 1800s, and it was recommended by doctors at the time. And little by little, they would increase the fasting period and reduce the eating period. And until it became something called the starvation method, where they would just prolong that fasting period quite a long time. And people actually died during those kinds of experiments and things. But that's what I see clinically. I see people who really have gotten into a trap with the intermittent fasting because I see a lot of patients. And so I've probably seen, it's so whatever's popular, that's what I'm seeing patients coming in dealing with is the aftermath of those types of popular diets. So the intermittent fasting is something that I've seen many patients that started out with just not eating after a certain amount, hour of the day. And then they went into more of the kind of catchy time restricted eating patterns that are marketed out there. And then they found that they were gaining weight. So they started extending the fasting period. And then they kept extending it and shrinking the eating period. And then they felt like they were in serious trouble because their weight was going up in spite of that, or it was barely holding. And they were very concerned. Now, a lot of these people didn't really have a weight problem to begin with when they started on this fasting business. So, what they had done was they created this mistrust in their body about the food supply. And that caused them to become weight prone when they hadn't been previously. So, whether no matter who you are as living beings, once there's something detected by our brain that there's some kind of a shortage of food for certain periods of time throughout the day, it has to start conserving energy in order to keep us going. And in that energy conservation, our metabolism slows down. And as we know, those slowdowns can leave a lasting imprint in your metabolism. And it can be very hard to reverse those slowdowns.
And I feel like a lot of these, fad diets, especially intermittent fasting, there's so much anecdotal evidence. They'll say, well, Bob lost 30 pounds in X number of days. And instead of citing scientific evidence, they're just saying, well, it worked for this person and then it worked for this person. But as you said in the beginning, everyone's metabolism is different. So that kind of quote unquote evidence really isn't relevant when it comes to deciding whether this is valid or not. And we're playing with our health here.
Yeah.
It's like we seem to be so careless about, oh yeah, I'll try that, deprive my body of calories for X number of hours. And I don't think we fully understand the long-term damage that that could do.
I,
No.
I think
Yeah.
it's really weird that it's usually the people I know who've done or continue to do intermittent fasting are usually people who probably maybe could lose maybe 5, 10 pounds. And they don't eat for like a day a week. They're like, well, we don't eat on Thursdays. And I'm like, really? Like a whole day? That's your day? You don't eat? Or they go, we never eat after 7. And I'm like, that's you're kind of starving yourself, but maybe that's not such a good idea. Do you feel headachy? Yeah, we don't feel great, but we don't eat and it works for us and we lost 5 pounds. And I'm like, but maybe it's not such a great thing. And they're like, well, it's working. And I just know that in a year from now, it's going to all come back plus. And you sort of don't want to be the naysayer because you're going to just get yelled at or whatever. And I just always say, well, I'm happy, I guess, that it's working for you right now, but I hope that you're not messing with your health. And okay, we won't make a reservation for Thursdays, I guess. Like, I mean, you don't know what to say
Yeah.
because they're always very gung ho.
Yeah.
And you're just like, all right, I always say, I don't think that's a good idea. I think
Yeah.
that's bad.
Have you guys ever heard of that like diet high phrase? I'm on a diet high or something.
Oh,
Yeah. Well,
yes.
I haven't heard it. What is it?
well, that's another reason why people get like hooked to these things is there's literally chemical production of addictive chemistry that occurs when you're starving or semi-starving. So
Oh, I thought it was just the happiness that they saw on the scale.
I don't think so. I think it's more like a sense of control
Oh.
that they're control, because the world is a crazy place, and if we can control the time that we
Hmm.
eat or the amount of
Oh.
carbs or this or that, all these factors,
Hmm.
it gives us a dopamine rush or something. But then also when you're in a bit of a famine state, there's some chemistry that changes in our brain, and it's the endorphins go up. Endorphins are those kind of euphoric pain killing, it's
Hmm.
basically opiates. It's
Wow.
Is it like a runner's high?
yeah, uh-huh, right. It's like a
Huh.
runner's high, yeah. And that actually opiates are addictive, as we know. Heroin's in the same family as
Hmm.
opiates, so is an opiate. And so, and there's another neurotransmitter called neuropeptide Y that increases from our hypothalamus. That's a starvation signal, but it also is shown to reduce like problems with depression and to make us feel less anxious. So, uh, and then ghrelin, when it goes up, it actually makes you a little bit happier. So, so I'm just saying that there's a whole chemical soup in there that can become addictive to dieters. And so it's
Wow.
real hard to talk to them, Andrea. Talking to them when they're in the middle of it, it doesn't get you anywhere.
Right.
They'll
So
come
they're
back. Yeah,
happy.
they'll come back to you and they'll say, "Now, what were you talking about before?" When everything starts going wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're always happy and then they find some other one,
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So
And then you see those diets where it'll be like Thursdays, that's our free day. That's when we can
Oh,
eat anything. And
right.
it's
And
like, I'm
yeah.
eating celery and saltines, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then I can have anything I want on
Oh, your
Thursday.
poor body
right.
doing that. It's
And
like
then they're at
Yeah.
the right, and they're at the donut place eating like 50 donuts. And I'm like, that doesn't seem good.
Yeah. So what I guess the takeaway, Dr. Cooper, is any quote unquote diet or idea that deprives your body of regular balanced nutrition, you're running a risk, right?
You really are. Absolutely. And as I say, if you have kind of the type of genetics that can handle it, you'll get away with it longer. But if you've got some vulnerable genetics with people in your family with obesity and diabetes, it will start triggering some backfiring effects pretty quickly.
And I feel like we should hit one more time. A couple of episodes ago, when we were talking about fueling your exercise, I heard you say that it's best to wait to exercise after you've had a couple of meals in the day. Is that right?
If you can, if your schedule permits, to try not to exercise first thing in the morning before you're actually fueled
Hmm.
adequately. And it does take hours for our breakfast to reach our muscles for energy source. So it would be great to wait until you've had maybe breakfast and a morning snack before you start doing the exercise, or do it later in the day. But if you have to do it first thing in the morning due to your schedule, then making sure you have an adequate snack the night before between dinner and bed,
Hmm.
and trying to eat something when you wake up before you head out the door.
And maybe Gatorade is not
Right.
fuel. Blue is not a flavor. It's not
Well,
food.
it's better.
It's
It
not
is
food.
actually better to have a sports drink while you're exercising if it's first thing in the morning than to not, whether it's,
Oh,
any one of those sports drinks, because it calms down, the stress hormones and everything when you've been fasting all night and then you're going and exercising. But ideally, have at least a snack before you head out the door if it's super early and you can't get breakfast, and then have a full breakfast right after. But the ideal would be, to really fuel
Food.
it better.
So yeah, so if you haven't had a good snack or a good meal, having a sport drink at least will get some
Something.
of the sugars and
Yes,
stuff
it'll
into your
help.
bloodstream.
Hmm.
Yeah. Dr. Cooper, enough people I think in our listening audience may be vegan or vegetarian. Does that change the equation when it comes to advice on how and when to eat?
Not really. It doesn't change it. The only concern is that, and this could be even for non-vegetarian vegans, but people on whole foods diets, which we do recommend, there can be a lot of fiber in the diet. So the fiber can fill up your stomach without actually, before you get adequate nutrition, you can feel full in your stomach because fiber kind of swells up in there. So, trying to get some foods in that aren't all whole grain, beans, legumes, because on a vegetarian or especially vegan diet, all the protein sources tend to be kind of high fiber, or at least most of them are high fiber. So, you're getting the fiber from the carbs and the protein sources. So, it can be a little bit hard on the gut, um, in terms of pulling out some of the important minerals from your gut and micronutrients. And then it creates like a fullness feeling, as I said, before you may be adequately nourished. So, mixing in some lower fiber carbohydrate sources is a good idea.
That's great. Anything else you think that we should cover in the episode before we put a bow on
Slow and steady. Keep eating all the time.
it? I love it. If there's one thing I've learned from you, Dr. Cooper, it's that sometimes we overcomplicate this whole thing and we way overthink how much to eat, when to eat, what to eat, and just have you've just got all of your patients kind of breathing easier because we know that the best thing for our bodies is just regular balanced meals and not to agonize necessarily exactly what we eat, but let's look at the food groups, just kind of make sure they're balanced and just not sweat it, right?
Right. Think of how many times we need to fuel our body throughout the day. Imagine if we're sweating it even half the time or a quarter of the time. That's a lot of stress, unnecessary stress, and a lot of second guessing yourself. So, yeah, I think we just need to relax about it and think, well, nothing sounds good. What could I eat that hits all those food groups? Or, oh, I'm really craving, a pizza. Well, pizza's great because it does hit all the food groups, and not worry about that too.
Yeah, so Andrea, I mean, I love how you engage with some of your friends on this topic, but it really does speak to the larger, I think, challenge that everyone seems to think they're an expert when it comes to
Everyone.
body weight and metabolism, and I just find that so interesting. I mean, it's it's one of those things where we almost never require scientific proof to have an opinion on something like this, but when we really think about it, we really do need scientific evidence if we're going to base our health and our life on this stuff, but we're so casual about how we just adopt some crazy diet that actually might be bad for us.
I've never been a huge like overeater or, the person who ate the whole entire bag of chips or anything like that. But once I had permission to eat whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, or when my body was hungry, I, and it's not the Ozempic or the Manjaro or whatever that is talking, I don't have to eat all those things. I just want a few. And it is the mentality of like, it doesn't matter. It's like, and I know that it's weird, but it's like once the rules are changed, you don't want 18 chocolate chips. It's like maybe today I want 25, tomorrow I want 14, tomorrow I might want
Yeah.
it's like it doesn't matter as much anymore that you have to count it
Yeah.
out. Um it really does make a difference when the rules are lifted and there are no rules. It's sort of like it's okay that you don't have to do that anymore.
It's like you're trusting your body and your body's trusting
Yeah.
you.
And I guess we should wrap up things by saying that, if you're doing all of this, you're eating balanced meals regularly throughout the day, and you still are struggling with your body weight, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, your cholesterol, then the whole point of this podcast is that you can be doing all of that right and still be going in the wrong direction. And that's when you need some medical intervention on all this stuff. So this isn't sort of the magic bullet, solve everything advice. This is sort of the foundation of what everything should be. And if that doesn't work, then take it to the next step, which is what we did. So the episode was, what should I eat and when? The answer is small balanced meals throughout the day. There's your answer. Dr. Emily Cooper, Andrea Taylor, this has been so much fun having you both on the show and learning so much. I love this. Thank you for another great edition of Fat Science.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Andrea. It was fun.
Thanks. Fat Science, no diets, no agendas, just science to make you feel good.
I'm Mark Wright. Thanks for listening to Fat Science with Dr. Emily Cooper, a Work P2P production. New episodes drop every Monday. If you've enjoyed the conversation, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. This production is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Join us next week for another episode dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.